I was born in Portland in 1955 in the old St. Vincent's Hospital up in Northwest. Not the St. Vincent's now, but the old brick building up Thurman or somewhere up there. We moved around all around Portland, but then when I was about 9, I guess, we moved to California for a couple of years. My dad was a printer and there was a printer strike, so we moved down there to get work. Then we moved to Alaska for a couple of years, and then we came back to Portland in '68. So hitting Portland in '68 from Kodiak, Alaska, may as well have been Haight-Ashbury as far as I was concerned, you know. It was a lot more going on there than there was out in the middle of the Bering Sea. My dad was not a musician at all, although my mom played the piano and gave me lessons for a week, and then we moved and sold the piano. But my grandfather was the town fiddler in Flasher, North Dakota. But he was also the town drunk, so if he was too drunk to play, the dance didn't happen. I only saw him play the fiddle once when I was a little kid. And like I just remember him in our living room like playing like Pop Goes the Weasel and stuff. But even then we're going, God, this guy's he could really play that thing, you know. But I don't know, back then, you know, I remember always seeing the kids with their violins in school, but I never really wanted that much. Never had a desire to play the violin, I guess, until later maybe. So I was a late bloomer because I could always draw really good. And so it was just established I was going to be an artist, a painter, you know. I mean, I think my parents probably had more in mind, you know, Norman Rockwell, and I was thinking like Van Gogh or something, you know. But I was even enrolled in the famous artists course on the back of the matchbook and stuff. And I flaked out on that, but I got a lot of paints out of it. And I had instruments like when I was like 5, I made a banjo from a pie tin and a yardstick and rubber bands. I don't remember like getting that far with it, you know. So I kind of wanted to, but we moved around a lot too, so you didn't take stuff with you. And then, you know, in California, I remember like trying to make a flute, you know, had like one of these big orchard knives. I don't know what a 10-year-old kid was doing with that, but the bamboo split and bam, right in you can still see the scar a little bit. But, so I'm running home bleeding. So that was the end of my flute career. Anyway, I always dabbled in instruments, but they never really took until later because I was going to be an artist, you know. I just had the wrong kind of art in mind, I guess, you know. But when we came back from Alaska, I had my .22 that my dad had bought me for my birthday rifle, just checked on the plane. Can you imagine that now? But I traded that. I was always a wheeler dealer, and I traded that for a Lyle electric bass guitar. So that's like my swords to plowshares moment, you know. But even that, I dinked around with it for a while and jammed on it a little bit and traded it off for something else. I don't remember what. But so again, it didn't take yet. And in high school, I remember having a guitar. But even then, like I took all the parts off of it and painted it. And you know, I was always like working on it more than I was playing it. So I never really started until like I was like 21, which now that I'm old is excuses wearing a little thin, but I guess the first band was like, would have been my brothers and me, just like I was like a Deadhead and psychedelic stuff from San Francisco bands we loved, you know, and so we played Dead tunes, and we did play once at the Slim's Tavern in St. John's, which is still there as far as I know. But it was a little premature. We weren't really ready, you know. I had a friend who was a professional drummer who had a gig there, and so he talked us into going. Anyway, non-illustrious start to my career. But the first real band I was in a group called Sidetracked with Michael Swanson and Deborah Kalita. And also in the band was Portland legend Earl Benson, who's a poet, and he was a folkie with auto harp and stuff, but he was kind of famous for singing and songwriting in the bar band Sleazy Pieces in Portland, which included Steve Bradley and other notable Portland musicians. So we had a gig every Tuesday night at the Dublin pub. And we played early and the Rounders played the late set. So it was a pretty heady first gig. Every Tuesday, I got to play with one of my musical heroes growing up in Portland. And then we got off stage and the Rounders came on. That was my first real gig. Probably made like $15 a night in beer or something, you know. This is the old Dublin pub on Belmont Street, not the one now out in, it's run by the same people, but they used to be on Belmont Street. And it was kind of the Laurel Thirst of its days, that same crowd, you know, underground hippie types, you know, roots music stuff. Kind of went backwards through the bands I loved into eventually hearing the old original stuff. Like I was really into the Dead, and so I kind of went backwards through their sources, and the same with the Holy Mold Rounders, you know. Once you start hearing the original recordings that they got it from, you know, it's like, okay, you're into the Dead, and then you finally hear Gus Cannon's version of Minglewood, and you go, oh, wow, this is cool, you know. Back in the 70s, I was playing guitar, but I wasn't performing really yet. But KBOO, radio station KBOO, the bluegrass and the country show was on Wednesday night. Now it's on Saturday morning. But before the bluegrass show, there was a show that's no longer there called Front Porch Music. And it was basically old time music. I mean, that's where I first heard Libba Cotton and stuff like that. And that could be where I first heard, you know, jug bands and stuff too. So I don't know exactly, there wasn't a moment when I said, hey, I want to play jug band music, you know. It's kind of a slow osmosis, I guess. But let me just say at the outset, I mean, I only think I've been in maybe a couple bands that actually had jug band in the title. So they weren't all purist bluegrass or jug bands. One of them being one from up here, the Riverbend Jug Band, which with my friend Mark Bristol I've mentioned, and my ex-wife Cynthia Gano, and Stuart Lex Luthier Brune, who lives across the street from here, who's an old friend of Billy Kennedy's from Arkansas. All these people, or a lot of the people, the jug band country blues crowd up here in Seattle that I know, I met through Johnny Ward in Portland. They were his old friends, you know. And so I was a few years younger than them. So now most of my musical associates are a few years older than me. One other band I should probably mention that was around before I started playing music that was of note was the Fly By Night Jazz Band, which included Johnny Ward, Turtle Vandemar, Billy Holtz, the late great washboard player Billy Holtz. Like another band up here that I wanted to mention from the Seattle area called Strangers with Candy. I mentioned outside about Larry Vanover, Mr. Jug, Uncle Lumpy, Reggie Miles, Larry Vanover, Orville Johnson on guitar, and the great Walt Singleman on washtub. Both them and the Fly By Night, those were hugely influential bands on us younger folks. It's kind of weird referring to myself as a younger folk at this point, but coming up, you know, these guys were gods to us, you know. They had to set the template. Strangers with Candy up here and the Fly By Night down there. I mean, there were others too, but these are ones I have at least peripheral connections with now anyway. The first real, what I'd consider a jug band I was in was the Crawdads of Pure Love. That started about maybe 86. And one guy used to call us the Junior Rounders. You know what I mean? Because we did so many rounder tunes. But so we were of another generation. In that band, we'd work a lot with a Eugene guy named Dan Maddox. He had a wash tub that was a bass drum. And he also was a master bones player, two-handed bones. I mean, of course, he plays guitar too and everything else, but he was our tub player, you know. And I'm leaving out Dave Heath on the mandolin, Chuck White, Chip Cohen, master fiddler, And Steve Hassett, like me, was kind of a satellite member of this band. There were a lot of other characters like myself who were like floating around the perimeter trying to get in, you know. So the Crawdads became more of a family, of a tribe of rotating musicians, you know, with several key nucleus players. So we all moved to Eugene, lived at a place like this out in the country, an old hippie commune thing called Livewood. The Crawdads played the grand opening of the light rail at the Saturday market. And I was miffed because they didn't get me for the gig. But I was like the third guitar, right? And back then I didn't really have songs. I wasn't a front guy. I was just a lead guitar player. And then I found out Steve Hassett was on the gig too. So then I was really mad, but he played harp, you know. But later, I heard the tape from that show. I think I still have it. And when I heard that tape and what a pure Jug Band sound it was, there was probably a tub player in there, although I'm not sure, maybe Dr. D, Dan Maddox. I listened to the tape later and I was convinced I had ruined the band by forcing that lead guitar in there, which eventually, after I left, when they were in Eugene, they became even more of a psychedelic electric band. But we were kind of like, we used to open a lot of shows for deadhead bands like 9 Days Wonder and stuff, because even though we were playing Jug Band music, we were still pretty psychedelicized, and for acoustic guys, we could take it out there, you know. And we were kind of the ultimate opening band because, I mean, when you're all acoustic instruments, you can't really blow away the main act in impact, you know what I mean? Because it's just, they're going to seem bigger after you. So we did a lot of that kind of stuff, but eventually I split off and moved back to Portland. And then I had a band called Jordu with some of the members, featuring a lot of my original stuff. But after that, we had a band called the Dirty Lowdown Desert Dogs, which was a lot more like a jug band, even though we had an accordion player. And a lot of times we used an electric bass, but sometimes it was a tub, you know. But we did a lot of, if for a folk life program, for a descriptor, I would call it Space Jug Zydeco or something, you know. And so the Dirty Lowdown Desert Dogs, there's a picture of it right over there with Johnny's in the picture. He was a sometimes member. Holding the trumpet, just for posing with the trumpet, is Johnny Ward. Sam Bernardi on the accordion. Yours truly, my wife at the time, Cynthia, on the washboard. The late, great Mark French on the bass. And you know Steve Hassett on the mandolin. So that was an institution for a while, and there's lots of tapes and posters of that. But so that was a big part of my life. And then my wife, Cynthia, played washboard. So her and I have been in like a million bands, all that include washboard. To me, a washboard goes in any band. Same with Paul Bissett. I've been in a bunch of bands with him, but they're not all jug bands, you know. It's not a novelty instrument. To me, it's a legitimate instrument, you know. So Cynthia and I moved to Seattle in the early 90s. In Seattle, then I had the band Lonesome Wally and the Wondertones, which included Stuart across the street, Lex Luthier on banjo and mandolin, Daddy Treetops on upright bass, Cynthia on washboard. I'm afraid I'm going to leave out key people here. But sometimes my friend who I haven't mentioned yet, who also lives here in Duvall, Douglas Johnston on the tub, you may know him. He plays with Gramps. Again, there's a nucleus of people, and you have hotshot fiddlers on a gig or not, or whatever, you know. I guess I was with a guy up here, Reggie Miles on washboard, and Jack Cook, who you might know of. Jack Cook, he's a famous 78 record collector and musician, but Seattle guy. But we had a brief thing going called the Ham Gravy Jug Band. That was kind of Reggie's thing. But that was just one of those names that got used once in a while, you know. There's video footage of that and pictures too. But Cynthia and I split up at the end of around 2000. I don't have exact dates, and I moved back to Amity, Oregon, actually, which is east of Salem, or my friend Sam, the accordion player, Sam Bernardi. We sort of morphed what was left of the Dirty Lowdown Desert Dogs into Bayou Cadillac. So it was kind of the Dogs, except without Steve and without my wife. But it was maybe a little more electric, but managed to get a record out at his place, and you can find that on SoundClick for free, Bayou Cadillac. Not to be confused with the Beausoleil album by the same name. But there's some Jug Band. I mean, I think it starts off with right key but the wrong keyhole or something like that. It's real, I used the Telecaster on some, but it was the National. I used some on there, and so it's kind of a mixed. And then I moved back to Portland after maybe 6 months living with Sam. I was doing some gigs at the Squeeze Club on Belmont because I lived and worked as a maintenance guy in the building. And we were doing every Wednesday, and it was turned into a real scene, but we finally got canned for making too much noise, even though we didn't have a PA. It was just got too big for him, and the neighbors complained. But Johnny Ward was in on that a lot, and he said it was called the Lemon Squeezers. And so we're kind of that, but then some of us morphed that into the big version of Johnny's Eagle Riding Papas. And he had a regular gig at the Mock Crest where we played every Tuesday behind the door where the stage was at the Mock Crest Tavern then. And then there were a lot of good times in that, and then there was some friction. I won't go into all the details, but it splintered off, and Johnny has used the name Eagle Riding Papas for a smaller, and Lauren Sheehan came in, but it was too big of a band. It needed to splinter. So Klaus and Doug Marks became the Reaver Brothers, and Johnny kept on off and on as the Eagle Riding Papas, and what did I do? I can't remember, but played a lot with Lowell John Mitchell, who you know. He plays jug and guitar, and him and me and Aaron on the harp, Aaron Lowe. And we hosted those Jug Band extravaganzas at Biddy's. I think you showed up for a couple of those maybe. We did a gig, Lowell and Aaron and I, at Beaterville Cafe for a long time every Wednesday, which was, I can't remember what we were flying by at that point. Oh, we were calling ourselves the Triplets of Beaterville. And you had to have seen that movie to get the joke or whatever, but we did a bunch of shows there for a long time, and Johnny Ward was a host one time, and different people would get a different guest every week or whatever. And then I started playing with Evan Schlaze in the New Iberians, which is an electric band mostly. Although Evan and I were doing duos at any pizza parlor that would have us that had a piano. So he'd play piano and I'd play guitar, and we're calling the hip pockets, because anything you can think of, just, although we were starting to call it the Big Easy, and then Katrina hit, and we decided we didn't want to cash in on that, so we left off with that name, but Evan still, he's had the New Iberians forever, and it's an established institution with many rotating players. Paul Bissett, been in it for a long time, and a bunch of different guitar players. But Evan's like the pace that keeps it together. Baby Gramps once gave me a piece of advice that I wish I'd heeded. He said, "Don't keep changing the name of your band." Well, I probably should have done that, because I haven't had, I move around too much to just like stick with one band all the time. So I don't have some institutional band that I've had for 20 years, which is unfortunate, because then when you're calling up the bar, you can just say, "Hey, I'm Lloyd Jones, you got a gig for me." Yeah, they know who Lloyd Jones is, But anyway, or the New Iberians, it's an institution. But there's bleed over in all these. You get a ringer, somebody can't do it, but you don't want to cancel the gig, so you get someone else, and it's legit, It's years ago when I first started booking my own shows, You know, I lost some good gigs. I was the main stage at the country fair, but then a couple of my players got $300 gigs somewhere else, and I canceled. But I would never do that now. I'd just get somebody else. And so when I get offered the gig, I take yes, and then I put the band together later. That's a little easier if you already got it. But all the best players are in 10 bands anyway, so, you know. But if you get your nucleus of people that know your material, and the more you work with them, if you've been working with somebody for 20 years, you can even throw a new tune at them and they know how you think so they can follow it, you know. I mainly play guitar, but I say I play guitar and mandolin. But I never started playing mandolin till later. But almost immediately, as soon as you start playing the mandolin, they're just glad you're not playing guitar. Hey, play that, you know, because there's a million guitar players around. But I can't really do my whole repertoire on the mandolin, you know. So, and I can control the band more if it's my band with a guitar than I can, depending on who I'm playing with. If I know who the guitar player is, you know, it's easier, and if they know my stuff. But there's just a lot of songs I would never try to sing if I was holding the mandolin, you know. So I play banjo too, 4-string and 5-string, tuned differently. But yeah, being a mandolin player, I want the generally low to high C, G, D, A, you know, in fifths. And I like Chicago tuning too, because I can do lead riffs, blues lead riffs on that, but it's just missing 2 strings then, you know. I've had brief forays into bass or something, you know, and kazoo, and years ago I played harmonica, but I just don't do wind instruments really, except kazoo. I do it all the time, but you know, you don't want to do it on every song. It just has to be the right song. In the Desert Dogs kind of made its name on my original stuff, a bunch of tunes which I don't do anymore because I have better ones I like better now. But even then we mixed in all the same tunes that are still my bread and butter ones now. Even if I'm playing in an electric blues band, I do my top 10 evergreen numbers: Stealin', Keep It Clean, Walkin' Cane, Ragged But Right, and my show closer at almost every set, every gig, like for the second set maybe, is Mobile Line, man. That's like, I wish I'd have wrote it because I sure have sang it a lot, you know. And it's all the ones everyone else is doing too, but they just, in the vaudeville world, they had the term insurance. And insurance means material that goes over every time. And so if you go out on a limb and it doesn't go over that good, then you pull out the insurance. You know, I almost always start with Stealin' just because I like the groove of it. I'm not one that likes to rehearse a lot, so people are always griping that they don't know the song or whatever, but they can't say they don't know that one, you know. I don't like to start off weak, so I don't have to recover, you know. So I start with Stealin'. It has a nice groove to it. It's a good way to ease into the show, you know. But, you know, sometimes I do something else just because I'm like, God, I don't want to be completely formulaic, you know. But Weber from the Rounders, he'd do the same thing. He'd start off with the same 3 songs every time, just so you can figure out how the sound is, you know, or whatever. You don't have to worry about the arrangement. You know how the arrangement is. You just get it going with those and then do whatever you want after that. I'm not someone who's that good at copying exact licks and stuff. And so, as an example, my version of Walkin' Cane, sometimes I don't even remember which version I started off with, you know. But all these years, I thought that I was basically, in my head, I was doing the, I think it was the Norman Blake version. A lot of versions of that song, the original might go, my sins are taken away, taken away. But I sing, my sins have overtaken me. And I think I got that from the Norman Blake version, but it morphed over the years when I dug out the tape and I heard the more Norman Blake version, and it didn't sound anything like what I was doing. Then that's the version I thought I had, so, but I'm not one to just like do it just like the record, but it doesn't mean I don't want to listen to the record. I tend to absorb things by osmosis rather than, tablature and note for note and stuff, because I'm not those guys. I'm me, I still do jug band music in the new Iberians, but it comes off different because it's electric instruments. But I did it there, and then later that day, it was fun watching Dan Hicks standing at the same microphone singing the same song later that I was doing earlier in the day, although I think he introduced it as jug band blues, where I just call it jug band music. I've played a lot of big festivals in Portland and Seattle, the Rose Festival. There's some country festival we played there where there must have been 10,000 people there. We had a band called Cascade that was like a Carter family, mostly Carter family, with Tom Tittle and my ex-wife Cynthia and John Andrews, legendary banjo player around town who used to run the 9th Street Exit Coffee House. But we were like an acoustic band. I played bass in that band just to flesh it out a little bit. But so like they got all these big Brooks and Dunn kind of bands, but here we are with the little crude little outfit with doing the Carter family tunes, but it's still like a sea of people out there. So, and then when I played with Jamie Leopold and the Short Stories, Jamie was the bass player for Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks, but in the last years of his life, he was a songwriter, singer-songwriter, and he had a band. And so we got to open for Dan Hicks a couple times at the Aladdin. That was pretty good. We were supposed to open for Bromberg, too, which he did, but then Jamie and I got into an argument, and I quit the band. And then he had the nerve to call and offer me tickets to the show. It's like, I appreciated it, but I don't want to sit here and watch somebody else play my part opening for Bromberg, But any high-profile thing I've done has never really been out of the Northwest, I guess. I don't have any big gigs in Paris or anything. The movie, The Last Hot Lick, is loosely based on Jamie Leopold's life. Musician, becomes famous rock star, gets strung out, falls from grace, tries to rebuild his career. So the movie The Last Hot Lick was directed by Mahalia Cohen, who's a part of Jamie's family, good friends with his daughter. So she directed the movie. And it was a low-budget movie, but she had some money for it. Her mom produced it, Deborah Cohen, and she had a pro film crew, so that helped. But it was one of these scriptless movies, so, there's a vague idea of what you want to do, and then we had to elaborate on it. So if you see that scene in my shop, it's all improvised. In fact, they asked me if I wanted to go by my name or be a character. I said, how about Joe? Just jokingly. And they go, Joe, that's perfect. So you're Joe. So there's one point, the storyline goes, he's burned me in the past on a gig. So he's coming to make amends and talk me into doing a gig with him that night, right? That's the storyline. So part of it calls for me to say, oh man, did you hear about our old buddy? He's dead, But I go, so man, did you hear about Joe? And then there's this big, long, pregnant pause. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm Joe. Yes, that would have made a great outtake, you know what I mean? But we did gigs in Washougal and all around the area, shooting scenes, stage scenes, and other various plot storyline scenes. There was another scene that got cut where Jamie and I in Washougal, where took us all day to film this, where he's nervously waiting for me out front because he wasn't sure if I was going to show. And then it didn't even make the cut. But, that's movies. But Jamie just used all his musician pals around town. Turtle Vandemar, Johnny Ward, Link McGrath, and that's the story of how I happened to be in that. The one story that keeps popping in my head, playing in Jamie's band, there was one particular difficult gig where the load-in was a nightmare, and flights of steps, and everybody was acting wrong in my view on how you do a load-in like this. You know, you got to pre-stage it and then one person watches it. Anyway, I was in a particularly bad mood apparently. I must have been griping too much because Jamie comes up to me and sticks a $50 bill and a pain pill in my pocket. And he goes, "Now what's your fucking problem?" And I said, "Nothing, boss. I'm all good now," you know. So I just love that story because it's so Jamie. Like, you know, now what's your problem? He was a good band leader, you know. I used to run sound a lot. Another thing that took away from playing, because once they find out you know how to do that, they don't want you to play guitar, they want you to do that. But Goldfarb hooked me up for a couple of blues workshops with Jeff Muldaur. And Fritz Richmond also lived in Portland. So both these guys I've jammed with at parties, but not worked with unless you count me doing sound for them. The first time I did sound was at some bookstore on Hawthorne. I can't think of the name of it. It's gone now. It's where the Gold Door is. So it was an underground bookstore, you know, lefty pinko bookstore. But so it was Jeff Muldaur and Fritz Richmond. This is a Goldfarb production. And they had Chris Miller on lead guitar just to kind of fill in the spaces. But so I'm doing sound, and back then I taped everything, you know. That's why I've got thousands of tapes now, unedited cassette tapes. But somehow Fritz got wind of me taping, and he had a problem with that because he wanted to keep control of the music or whatever. And I eventually convinced him it was just for my archives and I wasn't going to do anything with it. And I gave him a copy and he was good. But so the next time, it was probably a year or two later, we actually did it at the Starry Night, which is now the Roseland. It was still kind of a small production. I mean, my little PA, it wasn't a full room, you know what I mean? But somehow Mark got the room. But this time it also had Johnny Shines, who's like ran with Robert Johnson, you know, a great country blues legend. He's passed on now too. This wasn't that long before he died. He had a stroke and he played two guitars, one for slide and one regular. And when he was playing regular guitar, there was no problem. But on slide, he was having a little trouble with the muting, you know, but it was still great. There was also a third guy, a Chicago piano player named Professor Eddie Lusk on this gig. It's not germane to the story, I just felt I should mention him. But so the show's over, right? And of course I'm taping as always. And it's time to wrap it up. But Johnny Shines, he's not quite ready to shut down yet. So he goes into this, I think it was some kind of field holler or something. It was just haunting. And I'm like, I only have one tape, a 90-minute tape, and it's finished. And so I'm like going, God, do I turn it over? Because I didn't want to record over the beginning and the end, so I didn't tape it. But it was just fantastic. And as soon as he's done, both Fritz and Jeff Muldaur, they both come running over, and I know exactly what they want. And both their tongues are hanging out going, "Did you get that on tape? Did you get that on tape?" I'm like, damn, no, sorry, man, you know. But it was just so ironic because Fritz had given me such grief about taping in the first place on the previous show. They're like, "I hope you got that, man." You know, like, but it was just one of those that was too good to record. It was an offering up for the gods, you know. It was pretty amazing. Should have turned the tape over, but I didn't. Should have brought more tape, obviously. Bands that were like us weren't that many. Everyone wanted to be electric. So, you know, the King brothers, Curtis Chamberlain, who you know, and they had the Wanglers and the King brothers and Blind Rootin' Hogs, he was going by for a while, and I'd play gigs with them too. There was another band called the Tennesseans that used to play. It was like I think they had an electric guitar, but it was rootsy. Before my time, there was, of course, PH Factor and Johnny, what was it, the Melodious Funk, and Stu Dodge, and then Paul Bissett had Dr. Jazz, remember them? It was like a really good band. Gary Gunther on clarinet, I think. I mean, it was probably rotating members, but there was a gal singer whose name's escaping me. The Rounders were based in Portland, at least some of them, so they were around for a long time. Before I was a musician, I used to go see their shows at the Earth Tavern and Euphoria and all that in the 70s. So back then, I was just a fanboy, But later, I did wind up doing a few gigs with Weber and stuff, the Laurel Thirst and the Leaky Roof. There's another place we used to play a lot out in Sandy called the Elusive Trout. It was run by friends of ours, and it's still there, but they kind of bought out our culture and our friends' artwork and stuff, but it's not what it used to be. So many people wanted to rock and roll that there just weren't that many like real acoustic bands per se. But even like with my band Jordu and the Desert Dogs, we'd play even at like Satyricon, which is like notorious punk club, but on Sunday nights Bruno hosted cabaret night. It was an art scene, and there was all kinds of art, you know what I mean? And so a lot of people were happy to watch me do a set, but they wouldn't have come down there just to see me, you know what I mean? I wouldn't have drawn in that venue especially, but it was hey, that was kind of neat, now something else. It might be poetry but even the punk bands, some of them would play there on those nights too, or do more acoustic type stuff or whatever. But I'd get up there finger picking the National with a washboard player, and it would go over like gangbusters, that night. We weren't opening for Napalm Beach or anything, Although I have played with him a couple times, Rock and Shop at the Pine Street, just not on, just on casual stuff. But the underground community, you bleed over with people like there's another club called the Long Goodbye, which was around for a while until recently, or it became something else. It became a jazz club. I can't remember the name of it. Jimmy Max, down in Northwest, on 10th, I think. But they had an upstairs and a downstairs, and Tony Demicoli ran it for a while, and there was another guy, I can't think of his name, but it was the underground place to be, literally and figuratively. And so these cultures mixed and crossed, but I don't know if you know who Bruno was, Bruno Berger. He was a bouncer at the Satyricon and for Tony down at Key Largo, but he's just like an underground guru. He did these rockin' shops, which are just like they sound, music and booths. That's where me and Johnny became pals. We set up our guitar booths next to each other, and instantly it just became one booth. But all kind of manner of things went on at these things that I can't really go on camera about. It was a very underground thing. But in fact, I've always credited Bruno with single-handedly bringing together the hippie and the punk scene in Portland, because he made us all realize, hey, you're not our enemies. It's us against the rest of the world, And so there was a lot of bleed over in these kind of events. I love playing, but I can't stand endless time on the phone, online, trying to fill out a bunch of online forms. The booking thing drives me crazy, loading PA. And from out here, there's a few gigs out here, but, if you really want a musical career, you got to move into town. The action's in Seattle, not out here. And so that's like an extra hour both ways, you know. And then the pandemic hit, although I had gigs throughout that too, sporadically. We did some at some of these retirement homes around here where we'd play to an empty ballroom or auditorium and stream it into the rooms or whatever, you know. And then with the Devils of Duvall, I booked them into the farmers market here in the valley, a couple of them, the Carnation, and it's kind of really more of a hobby band, really. Basically absorbed the other 2 or 3 jug country blues bands in my circle and got them all into the Devils of Duvall, and I run it with an iron fist. But we played Folklife this year. The cool thing about that, the farmers market in Duvall here, at the new location, there's no power down there. So we do it all acoustic, which I like better because it saves me from having to plug in 8 guys with acoustic instruments in a PA and all that, you know. And we use a little battery-powered amp just with one mic for the vocal. Because what's the point of singing if they can't hear you? But so I tend to use this on that gig when I need a little more volume, you know. There's me, mostly on guitar, Douglas Johnson on the washtub bass, and sometimes rubboard and jug. Stuart Lex Luthier Brune on, mostly he plays now tenor banjo. A guy named Rick Scheuer is another local who plays a second guitar. Denny Redmond, the alternative mayor of Duvall, plays baritone, clarinet, or bass clarinet, and regular clarinet, and harmonica, and ukulele. And sings, like his signature tune is Minnie the Moocher. It's like Viper jazz kind of stuff. Recently absorbed another mandolin player, Jerry Coleman. He's a local guy. He had the group the Stillbillies around here. And then the aforementioned Mark Bristol, who I also work with in his bands sometimes. The Honky Tonk Sweethearts is a country band, and the Philly Gumbo, which is a well-established band around here, you know, along the lines of the New Iberians in Portland. Electric, got a great blind accordion player. And so I sub on that once in a while, like fourth call guitar player, you know. But Mark is the 8th member of the band. He plays washboard. But sometimes I give him the guitar, because he's got a whole repertoire of his own, downtown blues and all that stuff, and so I'll play mandolin while he's playing the guitar. So I hope I think I'm forgetting somebody, but I've always joked that I only get gigs so I can have an excuse to make a poster. So I have tons and tons of posters, some of which I made, some of which other people made. Paul Bissett was an early poster artist, you know, from the San Francisco scene and stuff. And I'm not involved in those. And that's before my time as a musician. But it's a way art and music intersect. Johnny and I knew each other for years just from trading guitar parts. It wasn't until later that we played music together, because we're both more than slightly addicted to guitars, to put it mildly. I mean, beyond what a normal musician is, you know. Studying, wheeling and dealing of them is a whole other pastime and area of interest in itself. I believe they're called guitar geeks, you know. Anybody in Portland has probably had me work on their guitar at some point or another. It's almost 50 years now I've been repairing guitars. I'm trying to get out of it, but it's not that easy. Steve Weber from the Rounders, he had, back in the 80s, we were kind of neighbors, so we saw a lot of each other, but he had this old Gibson guitar that it was like not playable. And one time he comes in, he's just like, so Walter, you got to prove to me you're worthy of taking on this job, just like that. And I just said something like, I don't have to prove nothing to nobody. He goes, okay, you got the job. So I fixed that, but I don't remember him ever really using it that much after that. He had, I can't remember the brand of it, but it was just some kind of clunker dreadnought thing, but it was Steve Weber, so he made it sound good. My whole life has been wrapped around guitars or stringed instruments for 50 years at least. So I've had literally thousands of guitars. I'm not exaggerating, because I buy them and sell them and work on them and buy them and fix them up and sell, and I've got a million stories of ones that got away. I wish I still had my 35 National, which I sold for $800, which is about what it was worth at the time, but now it's like $3,500 or something. But I've always been into old Gibsons, and so I've had a lot of old Gibsons that are absolutely unobtainable to me now, because even if I could afford, do you want to take it out to a gig? I had a really nice Gibson Southern Jumbo get ripped off for me at the Oregon Country Fair, of all places. I wasn't even finished paying for it yet. A lot of people were kind of shocked that I got over it so quick, but I'm a lot more fickle with guitars than a lot of people. It's not like this, I've had this since my dad left it to me kind of thing, But I do miss that National. But gets the job done. This is a Frankenstein with an old K-Craft neck with body by a guy named Gene Reinhardt. He was a cone spinner in Vancouver, Washington, and I wound up with the dregs of his estate. So it's a Franken guitar. I hear the cat coming down from the loft. Oh. Draco, come on in. Last chance to get on camera.